Hi, welcome to Wetpixel Live. My name's Adam Hanlon, I'm the editor of Wetpixel, and I'd like to thank CCAM for sponsoring this episode. CCAM produce a range of housing strobes and other accessories that are great products, and check them out on the website www.ccam.com. I'm joined by my fellow underwater photographer, Alex Mustard. Hi, Alex.
Hi, Adam. Nice to see you.
Nice to see you too. And we have a visual feast in store because Alex is going to show us some of his images. And specifically, I'm going to ask Alex today how to shoot manatees and dugongs.
Excellent. Well, I think they're a great subject for underwater photography. They're an interesting subject because I think until you see them, you think, how can they be interesting? That great big grey blob, sea cow, they're not the most attractive animals. But particularly manatees, the moment you spend any time in the water with them, you fall totally head over heels in love with them because they are gentle, slow. They do seem to live in slow motion. I remember the very first time I went to photograph manatees, it was about 15 years ago now. I was with Peter Rowlands and he did some footage filming them. And he was like, it's not very interesting video. And he was fast forwarding it just to get to a good bit to show me some interesting light or something. And actually, they were so interesting to watch on fast forward because you realize that all the milling about that they seem to do was actually very deliberate. They just live in slow motion. So they're very peaceful, herbivorous animals. They're threatened across around the world, and we've lost many sea cow species. Particularly in prehistoric times, actually, people often think that the human degradation of nature is very much an industrial age thing, and that has been really important. Actually, humans wiped out a great number of these species of sea cows long before we got to the industrial age, and then we did a particularly good job on most of the rest in the industrial age. And as a result, they are relatively difficult to see around the world, and by far the best place to see any dugong or sea cow or manatee is in Florida, and particularly Florida in the winter, where the springs around the Florida Peninsula, where a constantly reasonably warm water comes out of Florida and creates these warm springs where the manatees can warm up in the winter months, is a really great place to see them. And in some of the springs, I think just one or two, you're allowed to go in the water with them and have the chance to see them in the water and then take photos. So this first picture is a topside picture, which just shows how important manatees are to Florida culture, and particularly sort of the northern Florida culture where some of these towns are. This is in Homosassa, this great huge model manatee by the side of the road. But it's very typical all around their mailboxes, number plates. There's manatees on everything, and it's a great. As a manatee lover, it's such a great place to go. You just see them everywhere out of the water and also in the water. I think it's really important before getting to talk about them is this next picture, and which is lots of signs telling you what you can't do. And I think it is important to say that the manatee interactions are regulated in the States, and those rules change quite regularly, and they typically get stricter over time. And I have not photographed manatees for more than 10 years, and the rules have changed a lot. And this picture here, I think, is from 11 years ago, and they weren't new signs then, as you can see. And even then, all these rules were there being in place. So, you can see that there's people watching on the volunteers or wildlife officers watching on the land, making sure people are behaving in the right way. You can see there's a webcam there, and then there's all these signs telling you what you can and can't do. Because the rules constantly change, both for photography and for just general interactions, I think there's no point us going through the rules here. I would say if you're generally a respectful, nature-loving underwater photographer, you're highly unlikely to cause any stress to manatees, particularly if you're sensitive about the way you take photos. However, you still need to be educated on the specific rules. There are specific rules for the interactions and being in the water with them, for photography and also for professional photography. And it's important to know those rules before you go there. And I've taken groups there a long time ago, never had any problem with any of us. No one ever got the slightest problem. But while I was there were plenty of groups with other photographers around who were getting hauled up in front of the authorities and in quite serious problems. So it is worth knowing, and I know it's a lot more serious now than it was in the days when I went there. So
And there is definitely a permit system as well. Again, I'm not quite sure how the permit system is applying at the moment, but it's important that you want these things ironed out before you get there. So get some local knowledge, go online, do some research, and find out exactly what you can and can't do, and what you need to do before you get there.
Yeah, and then on any manatee tour you do with any of the operators, they will also explain to you what to do. But I think, particularly from a photography point of view, you want to be more educated before you go. And I don't think, there's no point us getting into specifics because they generally change. I mean, the basic aim of the rules is to this is the manatee spring, let them have their space and don't harass them. But when they want to interact, and I promise you, manatees really do like people and love interacting with them, even though you're not allowed to reach out and grab them. They will come and nudge you very hard, saying, "I want a good scratch now," and they're very keen on that whole idea. And this is an example of a diver interacting in what I would say is a good way. They're floating on the surface. They're not swimming. They're just And the manatee. I mean, this is a young manatee, and it's the young ones that are usually most interactive. This manatee was coming up to this diver and nudging her in the side with its head, going, "I want to be scratched. I want to be scratched." And certainly one piece of advice I was always told is always interact with manatees with a single hand. That way you're not grabbing them. If they want the interaction, they'll come to your hand. And I've had many times manatees love being scratched, and you just give them a little scratch like this, and they'll just clamp their flippers around your hand and hold your hand and move it around where they want you scratching. And they are completely adorable, and that's much more exciting than taking photos.
I remember a briefing where they said basically that while you're underwater, you'll find that you have a manatee that follows you around, similar to sort of dog following the hills. And I was like, yeah, right, that's a good one to tell the tourists, isn't it? But it definitely happens. These are animals that
they really recognize individuals.
They do, yeah. And they've and they definitely seek contact. They will come up and bump your hands for contact.
And so when they're initiating it, and they clearly love it, it's irresistible. Right. So onto the photography side of things. Manatees, I would say, are relatively easy to photograph because they're large animals living in shallow water, so it makes underwater photography pretty easy. It's a wide angle situation. And I think they're a subject that suits fisheye lenses particularly well. So I really don't see the point in going pretty much with any other lens. You might want to try a wide rectilinear just because it might allow you to shoot some splits or shoot some underwater pictures without too many bendiness things. But I have to say that every time I've taken alternate lenses there, I've always come back to the fisheye as my main lens. And I think particularly you want to chase good conditions there. And that's not so easy to find, because there's lots of things that go into it. So manatee photography, when the conditions come to you and the manatees are friendly and the water's clear and the sun is out, is very, very easy. You can also arrive there and it's super murky because the water isn't coming out of the springs, and it's super rainy and super, it's the winter. It's not always warm. We've had, ice on the window of the van when you get up in the morning to drive to the boats. It's cold as well. But when the conditions are right, it's really great. You might say, well, clearly the dirty seawater washes into the springs at high tide, but the area doesn't really have big tides, and it's often the atmospheric conditions that actually affect the sea level more, with onshore winds in particular piling the dirty seawater in and stopping the clear spring water coming out. And so there's a lot of factors that affect the visibility. And to be honest, as a traveling photographer, I would recommend going and spending a week in the area, and over that time you will get those great conditions, and you'll have all other mornings when there's not a lot to be done in underwater photography, but you can take a topside lens. There's great bird life, there's topside manatee photos to take. And ultimately, the sort of things that I look for to incorporate in the pictures are nice portraits of these amazing animals. It's great to get some natural behavior, such as the pumpkin seed fish here cleaning the manatee. I love the setting, so I always want to incorporate the trees and the clear water of the springs in the photos. And those are sorts of things I'm trying to get into my pictures. A picture like this, I probably would shoot without looking through the camera. I'd just hold the camera down and shoot. This was taken with flash. But actually, you don't need to use flash for a lot of the photos. This is pictures from 11 years ago, and back then there were no restrictions on using flash. These days there are some restrictions on that, and it's important to check that out.
Yep.
Right, the next picture I was going to show you is a kind of a panoramic view of a group of manatees right across the spring. And this is a shot that probably you have less chance to take these days, because when it's cold weather there, the manatees really go into the spring in large numbers. And in the old days, there were no restrictions on going in the spring as people in those conditions. But these days, when there are a lot of manatees going into the springs, they tend to close the springs for divers, so you don't get the chance to see these big aggregations. When the manatees are resting like this, you tend not to get much interaction anyway. It's more that you just get the chance to shoot lots of them sleeping on the seabed. So you don't really, you're not disturbing them. You're just snorkeling on the surface. You can see I'm on the surface here, just taking a view of all these manatees stretching out in front of me, which is really amazing to see. But actually, having done these photos, we actually went outside the spring and waited for them to kind of wake up and want to go out and feed. And then often on the way out, they were more interactive for a little bit when they got going. The bubbles in this picture, I should probably comment on. Manatees are herbivores, and they eat lots of plants. And actually, it's really good to be big as a herbivore. The bigger plant material is quite hard to process, and the bigger you are as an animal, the longer your gut is, and the more efficiently you can be a herbivore. So it's actually one of the reasons why manatees are they're a lot bigger than people think they are. They're often, the big adults can be 4 meters long, really twice your length, and they're a lot of your girth as well. Whereas the youngsters are smaller than you. And that helps them be efficient herbivores when they're in the springs. But
I've heard someone say that they can weigh a ton, which is a fair weight. So you have a ton to a half ton to a ton's worth of herbivore that creates a lot of gas, which follows you around. So
I didn't have to time this picture particularly carefully. There was plenty of opportunities.
Brilliant. Yeah.
And this is but it's a very great place to take photos. It is possible to shoot manatees in other parts of the sort of the Caribbean, because they are through there, but their population levels are very, very low, and a lot of the places they're living in don't have diving infrastructure and things like that. But particularly along some of the Mexican coast, the Belize coast, there are a few places where you can see wild manatees in those areas and get the chance to photograph and interact with those. They tend to be a little it's not. I was going to say they're a little more streamlined than the Florida ones, probably because they don't need to stay as warm in winter. But it's very hard in any other place to see them, but you get the opportunity to photograph them in more different environments, which I think is more is nice. But for me, those classic Clearwater Springs are just such an amazing place to see manatees.
It's much more likely to be opportunist shot, isn't it? It's more like Mexico, Belize. In Florida, you can go to Florida, consult the local guidelines, and you will definitely have plenty of photographic opportunities with manatees.
And I've always done all my manatee trips with the local operators. I've always used birds underwater, but there are other ones that are really good. And I think that with them, you've got people who've been doing manatee trips day in, day out for 20, 30 years. They know everything. The guides are fantastic. And I always found birds, treat you, once they know that they can trust you to behave, they'll treat you like a grown up and allow you to do what you want to do to get your pictures, as long as you're not stressing the manatees, because that's what everyone cares about. I was going to finish off by talking a little bit about dugongs. So this next picture is a dugong in the Red Sea. And the difference between dugongs and manatees is really at the rear end, in that dugongs have a dolphin-shaped tail, a fluked tail, whereas manatees have that circular paddle-shaped tail. And dugongs are much faster as a result. And they live in a more open sea environment, certainly than the manatees that I'm used to experiencing. And they're actually very widespread. You can see them right across the Indo-Pacific, but nowhere are they common. And because they feed on seagrass in particular, they often live in very murky, low visibility environments, the sort of places divers don't hang out. And as a result, they aren't so commonly encountered. But they're seen, right the way across, all of Southeast Asia, out into the Pacific Islands, and all the way across the Indian Ocean up into the Red Sea. The Red Sea population is actually growing at the moment, which is a really good sign. And there's a few manatees that are dugongs there which allow interactions. People often think it's just one, but actually there are several, particularly males that are put down the coast, which are quite approachable and give good photographic opportunities. And I did these with out of close to Master Allow. I actually had photographed 2 different manatees on dugongs on this trip. Dugong photography is kind of the opposite of manatee photography in terms of experience. Manatee photography is kind of like this slow motion, super chilled out, relaxing experience where you take a few pictures and you hang out with manatees for a few hours. Dugongs are much harder work to do because they can swim really fast. And generally your chance to encounter them is when they are feeding on the seabed. And when they're feeding, they'll drop down on the seagrass. They're quite deep, so you need to be on scuba in the Red Sea, certainly. Then they'll go up to the surface to breathe. And then they'll swim a bit and come back down and land on another area of the seagrass. When they go up to the surface and move to the next area, they move really quite a long way, about maybe 50, 100 meters, and you need to swim that to keep up with them, so that you can get to them when they've settled back down again and they're feeding. And once they're feeding, you can swim up to them. So all my manatee pictures are taken when I'm completely out of breath because I've been charging to get close to the manatee to keep it in sight, and then trying to get my breathing under control so I can be nice and relaxed when going up to shoot it and get my nice shots. But you get the chance to get really nice behavior shots. You can see, I think, in pictures like this, how they're related to elephants. And they're the ones in the Red Sea often have these juvenile golden trevallies with them, which adds a bit of extra interest in the picture. You can follow them at the surface and see them at the surface as well, which is where a lot of people see them. And I quite like this picture, which was taken of a manatee. I was actually following it between 2 seagrass patches, and it swam over to have a look at me. And I like this picture because it's got the reef environment in as well. So it feels a bit more like, oh wow, there's the Red Sea I recognize and a dugong in it. Which is why I thought I'd show this picture. It's the same dugong as the previous picture, and you can see the animal quite well swimming like this. But all I remember from this was just being completely out of breath the whole time and mullering through my air because it was just so energetic, chasing it, then trying to calm yourself down, doing your photography, and then chasing off after it again. Not chasing it around, but following it, so you keep it inside.
Following it, There's some seagrass beds sort of south to Port Galib, which are it's a fairly good opportunity of getting dugongs there. But as you say, it's very much a kind of, they're on the bottom for a while and they got to the surface, and then you have to, if the visibility is good enough, which it normally is, you can follow them from underwater, but they're moving a lot faster at the surface than you can swim underwater. It's and
it's very different day by day, and I've only done a few days of it. I know that in Raja Ampat they sometimes see them, in Philippines, in lots of places across those regions, and sometimes the male dugongs can be a little bit frisky as well. The manatees always seem to be super chilled out, but male dugongs can occasionally be a bit frisky with divers, and particularly with snorkelers, and that they can be potentially dangerous in that situation. So that's something just to watch with dugongs. And as always, this was done working with expert local guides in Egypt who know the dugongs, know how to interact with them, and are able to put you in the water in a way that's good for the ewe and good for the dugong as well. So in both places, I think my takeaway is they're actually quite easy animals to photograph, but getting in front of them has challenges. And the key to overcoming those challenges is working with the local experts, as it so often is with wildlife.
Yeah, wonderful. Local knowledge is king. Thank you, Alex. And I presume people can search your manatee and dugong imagery on amustard.com.
Yeah. There's plenty on there. I'm a big fan of both, so there's probably too many pictures of both on my website.
The scientific name for manatees and dugongs, the family name, isn't it, is Sirena?
Yeah, but they're actually both in different genuses, so you're better to search for them both separately. There's not really a good route to. Because the dugong's Latin name is dugong dugon, and whereas
Sirena. Yeah. Okay. So go back to that. Use the common names. But thank you very much, Alex. And thanks again to CCAM for sponsoring this episode. We very much appreciate them helping us to make these things. Thank you all for watching. I hope that you enjoyed it, and I look forward to seeing you again soon.